Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's edition of the Gamut Network. A really interesting interview we have today because I think that I don't know if I've had a guest on that parallels so beautifully in the work that she is doing and the work that I am doing, and really bringing it together for full inclusion in the world that we are creating. So with that, I am so excited to have Jennifer Brown on the show. Hi, Jennifer.
Thanks, Mindy. I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. As in our kind of our pre-chat, pre-interview, I got so excited about everything that I want to talk about in today's edition. So I want to just really start with your personal story because in and of itself, that's fascinating of pivots that you've had to make and how the intersections of your life have come together to where you are today. So give us a little bit of the history of Jennifer Brown.
Oh, so many intersections and a winding path for sure. So I was a nonprofit activist in my 20s. I never would have dreamed I would be helping corporations be more inclusive like I do today. But we were in sort of community organizing, lots of different social justice issues. But I was also a singer on the side. And so I decided to pick up and move to New York, as one does, with knowing
Not just
nobody.
a singer, an opera singer. So
Opera singer, yes,
I don't think
indeed.
everybody can just be an opera singer.
That's true. Yeah, I grew up in a musical family, and I had a parents that really encouraged me from a very young age. So I've always been a performer ever since I was little, and I didn't do it reluctantly. I actually really loved it. So I got to move to New York, study opera. Sadly, I injured my voice during the course of training, and I had to get several vocal surgeries a year apart. And I just, the recovery is scary and you don't know if your voice is going to come back, and it comes back. But I think with every subsequent surgery, you lose a little bit of that flexibility that you really need in your vocal cords. So I knew the writing was on the wall. I knew I needed to go and yet find something else to do. But stage performers are amazing people. We're very resilient, and we're talented at a lot of things involving people and performing, and so much of the world is like that. So I found my way to a second master's degree in organizational change and leadership, meaning sort of HR. You can think about it in that field. And I didn't know that was a thing, but I took to it immediately. I loved it. And I got to specifically focus in on facilitating groups. It ended up being something I just was really good at for obvious reasons. And I really I enjoyed thinking about human potential in the workplace, and also learning through many, many facilitations of different companies and industries and groups of managers that so much was broken in the workplace. And I started to really form a point of view. And I also discovered that I thought I should be an independent consultant so that I can kind of speak truth to power, as we say. And I started to really form some strong opinions about what needed to change in order to include everyone. I'm also, though, a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and I've been out since I was 22. So I was closeted very much as a performer, not to my friends, but certainly professionally, right, to casting directors and things, because I don't give people a lot of credit for having like big imaginations about who can play what kind of role. And I was very worried I would get typecast or not cast in the roles that my voice was right for. And then as an entrepreneur, I was entering this business world, speaking to senior leadership and mainly like, rooms full of men and boards and things like that. And I thought being a woman is hard enough. Like, how do I also bring being LGBTQ into the room? And it's something I still, to this day, I pause and I'm very thoughtful about when I broach that topic. I try to not take advantage of passing privilege. We talk about like being authentic, being ourselves, and the importance of role modeling. And I take that very seriously. So I try to not disclose. And my job isn't to make people comfortable, but to challenge them. But, you have to, it's the stance that we do about our difference and our visible difference, and then our invisible difference too. So, but now I'm very proudly a woman-owned firm, and I'm also an LGBT-owned firm. So there's actually certifications that you can get
Oh,
for these. Yep. And then and there's also disability-owned firms. There's minority-owned firms. So this whole kind of supplier diversity world, for those of you who are interested and don't know what I'm talking about, really research it. It's amazing. We work with companies now that value the fact that I am a diverse founder. I'm an underrepresented founder, and therefore they want to spend their money with firms like us. In fact, they have like goals and metrics for what they need to be spending, whether it's custodial services or event planning or any kind of supplies that companies have to buy. They have choices about who they spend with. So it's a really exciting movement, and it's a way to kind of disclose who you are, but also have that be part of the business conversation and have business relevance, and not just have sort of a, I don't know, something that feels like very personal or sort of a moral argument, for
Yeah.
example.
I want to go back to a couple of points that you brought up, because they're so relevant in paralleling to our audience of people with disabilities. In that, first of all, for example, I had a woman on the show previously that at 17 years old, she contracted this unbelievable virus and within 15 minutes was fully paralyzed. And prior to that, she was a musician. She played the cello, she played piano, she played guitar, and her whole world turned upside down at a very young age. But what I love so much about your story and her story is now she is a composer. And she has found a way to take her talent and her love and her passion and pivot to something that she can do. So it's interesting to me that you experienced something similar in the fact that you thought your life was going one way, and due to something that was out of your control of what happened to your voice, you went a different path. And why I wanted to bring that up is that, you know, we're all humans, and what happens in your life happens in people with disabilities lives, whether they are born with it or it happens during their life. You know, there are pivots, there are mountains that have to be climbed, there are valleys we have to get out of, and you have really proven that your life was going one way and it pivoted to another way. And the other thing that I definitely want to dig into is the commonalities of being in the community of LGBTQ plus, and the population of people with disabilities. In that you felt closeted, you felt that, and still seemingly to this day, it's a thoughtful decision of how you disclose that. But even in the work that I have done in speaking, you know, even with you co-hosting on your show, or I've been in a lot lately of HR forums talking about how the employees are still to this day potentially closeted about their disability. Because if it's not visible, it's very, it's a challenging thing that the stigma is going to be there. If you reveal that you're on the spectrum, or in my personal case with Oliver, he is a little invisible, that if we were Zooming with him right now, I don't think you would know that he had muscular dystrophy until he got up, he moved, he walked. And so therefore, you know, there are real parallels between what I think the LGBTQ plus community is ahead of where the population of people with disabilities hopefully will get to. So can we talk a little bit about where this community has come from to where they are now? And do you also see parallels in the work that you do in terms of being open about a disability?
Definitely. Oh, there's so many parallels. We talk about it all the time, because so some of us can hide our identity, that aspect of our identity, and some of us can't too. So I want to make sure people know, you know, I can pass through the world, you know, and not disclose. And there are others that would say in the community, well, I can't pass, you know, I walk in the room and people know.
Yes.
And so I want to acknowledge there's that diversity within the diversity, right? We have to always be inclusive and not make assumptions. And there's also, it's impossible to be like one spokesperson for an entire community that's so diverse. But we do share a lot. I think in the workplace, it's it's especially hard, I think, both ways. Like if you walk in the room and your difference is visible, you have to deal with the stereotypes and reaction and the potential biases that hit you. And then if it's invisible, you have all these choices to make around bringing it up and when and how. And really, do you trust the person across from you to know and do the right thing with that information, right? And do you trust the institution you are disclosing to? And this is why in the like employee engagement surveys, for example, like annual surveys, a lot of us don't disclose who we are, even though most forward thinking companies have all the boxes to say it, to invite you to disclose, but you don't trust the institution with that information. And so we're also very underreported. You know, if an executive says, well, I want to know how many LGBTQ plus people we have, and I want to know how big is our community of employees with disabilities, you're never going to get that right number because there's so much fear.
Mm.
The statistic about LGBTQ plus people is 50% of us are still closeted in the workplace. So 50.
I'm
And this,
shocked that it's
I
not that
know, I
high.
know. It's crazy. So we don't, for all the pride events, for all the, and this is true for disabilities as well, you know, there's affinity groups in a lot of the companies I work with for both LGBTQ plus people and allies, and also people with disabilities and allies. And there's like tons of people involved, rah, rah, rah. And the company is winning all these awards even. And then you've got all these people who are still not disclosing. So that's to me a very fascinating tension, and is why I think I went into this organizational consulting work, because I thought to myself, how can we build inclusive workplaces where everyone feels they can bring their full selves to work? And how do we, if I'm a manager, if I'm a colleague, if I'm an aspiring ally, if I'm a CEO, like how do I somehow communicate this is a safe place where you're not just tolerated, you're not just accepted, but we actually seek diversity because we value it as it drives innovation. It helps us understand our customers, you know, that are diverse, right? And so I love working with the companies that are trying to understand that, and then what gets in the way of that. And that's where I think our skills come in terms of helping them, you know, get on the journey. And there's no such thing as a destination. It is a journey.
Oh,
Um,
without
com-
a doubt. And
it's
a
all,
long one,
yes, it's a
and a
long
very long
one.
one. You better
Yes,
eat your Wheaties for this
it's
story.
true. It's true.
So now in the work that you do, and let me just catch everybody up, that you are the founder, CEO, creator of Jennifer Brown Consulting.
Mhm.
Can you just tell us briefly about what you do? I know that we've iterated a bit on it, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear based on my next question that I'm going.
Definitely. Okay. So I told everybody I was an HR like employee, didn't work for myself. Then I was laid off and I was like, oh gosh, I think I should be an independent. And I started my own firm. I started to hire people. And today we have a team of over 20 people. We have some amazing consultants who to literally deliver strategy consulting work to clients. And our clients are typically large organizations, although we have some that are nonprofits, philanthropic, like foundations are clients, but typically it's the big, like consumer brands that are our clients, whether that's supermarket chains or Disney or technology companies like HP, you know, so we get called, I think, when they want strategy development to say, what is our diversity and inclusion strategy going to look like
Mhm.
company wide?
Got
So
it.
we actually know how to build that from scratch, or to refresh something that already is in place but needs to be updated. Or we may get called to build what's called affinity groups, which I mentioned earlier to you, which we are very well known for, whether that's the Women's Network or People with Disabilities Network or the Black Employee Network. We specialize in those in particular. And if you think about, for large companies, your audience may not know, but like tens of thousands of employees in one company will be involved in these groups. I mean, they're like cities unto themselves. And in this virtual COVID world, these groups are meeting virtually constantly and building community and providing a sense of belonging in a really uncertain time. So it's an incredible moment for this kind of work, because we're investigating actually what's better for some of us in the virtual world, where we've really struggled to bring our full selves in the physical workplace and in the office, which is full of bias, like
Yes.
from accessibility and visibility and accommodations and, just on so many levels, like walking around as a woman, there's a statistic around open office plans that make women feel like we're being scrutinized
Mhm.
for our appearance. There's just like, it's a place that's, I think, riddled with a lot of behaviors that have been exclusionary for us, many of us. So I do think there's something really neat happening right now where maybe that some things can go right.
I completely agree. And I do think that specifically, I think the silver lining of this will be a focus on people with disabilities in
I
the
do too.
workforce.
I do too.
In that, what, as you just mentioned, many of the physical dynamics of an office are a barrier to people with disabilities being able to work in certain companies. And now having this opportunity of doing it virtually, and we all are doing it right now, I think
Right.
will lead to more opportunity for people with disabilities to get into the workforce. But one thing that you just said, which I think is so important to talk about, is all the groups that you just said. So we have that you said the women's group. We have name some other ones.
So there's the Latinx group, there's Asian, API, Asian Pacific Islander groups, Black employee networks. There's generation, like millennial or generation focused groups. Sometimes they're multi-generation groups for like increased cross-generational understanding. And
Mhm.
sometimes they are more focused around millennial and Gen Z. And Gen Z is the oldest of Gen Z is now 24. So they're entering the workplace. So there's those groups. There's veterans networks, very, very popular, more being created all the time because veterans deal with a lot of bias in the workplace.
Mhm.
And I don't even go into that, but you can read about it. And it causes a lot of retention problems once you bring veterans in. Many spin out because of the workplace, again, like not being built by and for so many of us,
Yeah.
means that it's very difficult to do our best work and to stay, honestly, and shine truly. So women's networks, Black employee networks, which ones have I forgotten? LGBTQ plus, obviously, and allies, pride networks are everywhere. And really, these groups inform company strategy when it comes to attracting and retaining the talent from that demographic.
Yeah.
And then also marketing and building products and services for those customers and those partners. And so either the commercial, what we call business case for diversity, I think stems from this need and these gaping holes of understanding and cultural competence for homogeneous leadership teams, who are most likely still cisgender, male, heterosexual, white, and likely not people with a disability. So there's a homogeneity at the top, and those tend to be a lot of the clients we work with. And we work with some amazing people who know that they don't have all the answers. And in fact, from an identity perspective, they're at a big deficit right now because they're trying to steer this ship and they've got this incredibly diverse workforce, but they don't reflect that workforce and they don't reflect the diversity of the outside world either. And
Right.
to me, that's like a risky place to be. I wouldn't want to be there and having to like steer the ship and figure out like, what is this business going to look like on the other side of the pandemic?
Yes.
Like, let alone the fact that the demographic changes are happening and we don't reflect that world.
Absolutely.
So
And the reason why I wanted to highlight those different groups is because, first of all, I didn't, and maybe it's just because you didn't say it, but I didn't hear one for people with disabilities.
Oh,
Like,
yes. Sorry. No, yes. The people with
okay,
disabilities is right in there.
fantastic.
Yeah. And I
Okay.
wanted, Mindy, it
Yeah.
happened like in a certain order historically.
Oh,
So the ethnicity based groups, the women's groups were the first. The ethnicity groups were also in the early days, like 20 years ago. And then LGBTQ plus got added, and then disabilities got added like 10 to 15 years ago. And then the latest are more like generations, veterans, et cetera. So it's actually, there's been a progression in terms of
interesting.
what companies are, I think, ready to tackle. And we still meet companies that are like, well, we can only do a women's group. That's all we really have the bandwidth for. and we'll say, you cannot launch this without launching these other groups.
Yes.
Like the messaging is not what you want. Trust us on this.
Yes.
So anyway, I just wanted to point out too, there's been
That's
this really neat evolution.
really interesting. But again, I wanted to point out all the different facets of it, because one thing that I find so interesting about is that I'm often asked about from companies and big, large companies about the fear of target marketing. That they are so afraid to market specifically to people with disabilities for products that they have that were created for people with disabilities.
Wow.
And so I find that there's a disconnect, is my point, that if internally we are creating all these groups, whether it's for the LGBTQ plus community, the women's community, the Black community, the Latin community, and people with disabilities community, why in the world would we say, but no, we can't just market to people with disabilities? That would be awful. That would be calling them out. That would be saying, and these are major companies that are questioning that obviously I feel completely sure that if you're developing a product for people with disabilities, then you must market to people with disabilities specifically.
Yes.
So I find that so interesting. That how do you think, in the companies that you're working with, and certainly that I'm working with, how do we get them comfortable with that? How do we say to them, that it's okay to market to people in the Black community or the Hispanic community or the community of people with disabilities? It's a-okay. There's a reason why that community formed.
That's right. And so they don't want to make a misstep. I think there's it's sort of at its heart is probably that fear is rooted in, I hope, wanting to be respectful. Right.
Very much so.
Yeah. And sensing that you don't have the competency to do it well. And so you don't do it at all, which is not the right answer. You and I know. I mean, we love to see ourselves in products, and advertising is amazing, but we want to see ourselves reflected accurately.
Yeah.
And so for the LGBTQ plus community, originally in the early days, somebody would grab like a stock photo of what looks like, a mother and her grown adult daughter and try to pass it off to the community as a couple. Like that's an example of good intentions, poor execution. Yeah. And it's also an example of not having the right people at the table in the design process. So so many arguments for attracting and retaining people from all these diverse segments is not just to be tokenized, but honestly to have that seat at the table to say to the company, I don't believe that image. Here's what we need to do to have a better image. That cultural competency we bring is really helpful and necessary for a company to go big with an ad. And we know the companies who've messed up with big ads, right? That have not gone well, right? And they've needed to pull it. Like PepsiCo had a horrible Kardashian-focused Black Lives Matter. I don't even want to keep going, but you can imagine it was bad. And they pulled it within 24 hours, and I think it's such a object lesson for a lot of us, and saying like, so who was at that table, and were they listened to, and were they really heard and heeded? Because it's one thing to be at the table. It's another thing to be listened to, and have like a voice. So those two things need to be present in order to approach diverse marketing in a respectful, accurate way. But yeah, we love to be marketed to. Seeing myself, I might argue, having intersectional images are really important. So these days, I do think that perhaps that single identity piece, fine and great, but what if we could have a family, a same-sex couple, two women of color, one who has a disability,
absolutely,
or they have a kid that they're signing with. Why not? And then you might get criticized for, you're trying to check all your boxes.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, you know what? Go ahead and check them.
There's never going to be a perfect of anything. which is probably why they keep adding letters, maybe, too.
Yes, it is. It's true. And we lose our audiences when we get too crazy about
Yeah,
the wording and the language, but language is so important though, because,
so important.
putting
And in
even,
our world as well. I mean,
oh yeah.
again, something that we spoke about, I asked Jennifer for my own education, what is the difference between the G and the Q? Because I kind of go between generations in that I'm approaching 50. So the word gay, when I was little, was thrown around like,
Hmm. Hmm.
like
Like a,
like anything.
yeah, yeah.
And same probably with queer. I would say gay was probably used a lot more, but you just explained to me, the differences between it, and which I definitely would like you to educate our audience as well. But the reason why I glommed onto that so quickly is because language in the world of disability is so critically
Oh,
important
so
as
important.
well, in terms of identifying the person before the disability.
Right.
The word handicapped, which I think I spoke about on
You
your
did. Oh
podcast.
my goodness. Everybody really valued your insight on that. My
Yeah,
goodness.
that it was, handicapped. The derivation of that word is a person on the side of the street who had a cap in their hand to beg for
Mm.
money, because that's all that they felt people with disabilities were good for. And so the fact that we're still using that word
Ah.
in today's day and age is, and it's the symbol really of the population of people with disabilities is handicap. So
Wow.
we understand exactly, the power of words, as your community does, and I think that's so important to bring up. But just for everybody's edification, because I was fascinated by it, the difference between the G and the Q, please.
Yeah, and you might want to know the difference between the T and the L
Why
too,
not? Why not? Why not?
So,
I'll take it all.
so, specificity is a gift, right? And it's the diversity within the diversity and the layers of identity that were sort of, I think, combined into this one community for ease of reference. And so putting LGBTQ together even was more shorthand, I think, for people who aren't in the community and for the community to kind of find each other, right? But it's always been a shorthand, and shorthands are abbreviated. They are not all encompassing,
Mm.
and they actually sometimes don't make sense because they conflate some very different aspects of our identity. So for LGBTQ plus, the evolution again, we used to talk about L as lesbian, gay, and bisexual are three sexual orientations, which means who you are attracted to, um, and your sort of sexual behavior, but also I would argue sort of cohabitation, wants and needs, and romantic attraction. And I mean, there's so many ways to define these things. So forgive me if anybody's an expert in your audience. But I'm a cisgender. So I'm a cisgender gay woman, meaning gay is the sexual orientation part. And my partner is Michelle of 20 years. But I identify as cisgender, which means I'm not the T in LGBT. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm cisgender, which is spelled CIS, cisgender, which means same in Latin, which means the congruence that I feel between the gender, my sense of my gender, and the gender of the body I was born in. That means that I am cis. So if you hear people refer to people as cis, it means that our sense of our gender matches the gender of the body we were born in. And we walk through the world and we don't need to deal with that, reconcile it, make some hard choices, lose our jobs, endanger ourselves. Like there's so many impacts to that community. So even just those two things, you got to pull them apart and know that L, G, and B refer to sexual orientation. T refers to transgender. Q is queer. And Q is interesting because it used to be an epithet and a slur when we were growing up. And has been embraced, like so many things, and reclaimed by younger people in the community. And I like it because it actually is this umbrella term for anything that's not heteronormative and not gender normative. So you can be queer and have varying identities, both on the sexual orientation side, which is who you're attracted to and want to cohabitate with, and also how you express your gender. So if I'm gender queer, I may, and I'm not, by the way, I'm just obviously like super
Yeah.
normative, and I'm comfortable in this expression, which is technically kind of a feminine normative expression. But I have lots of friends who are gender queer, gender non-binary, gender fluid, which means that we are, maybe their gender expression is hard to identify from a binary perspective. And it may shift day to day. It may be also something that's evolving for that person. And no longer does transgender, by the way, mean that I'm going like and getting the surgery and again going from one end of the binary to the other.
Mm.
But we're now, many people choose to live on that continuum of identity. And so, yeah, and then the plus is meant to be kind of add another placeholder for everybody that doesn't like any of those letters.
Yes, yes. It's
So
important because you're never going to make it perfect for everybody. It's just that's an
exactly.
impossibility. But that was
Yeah.
so helpful.
I
Thank you
hope
for
so. And
explaining
by the
that.
way,
I've always wanted to
I
ask.
do. I know. Let me just two more letters. You'll hear LGBTQIA. So I refers to intersex, which means that you are born with not necessarily binary sex organs and hormonal sort of, it's an anatomy thing. And if you want to follow that conversation, the best place to look is just in the Olympic athletes. Like, oh my goodness, total, like there's so much chatter and horrible decisions happening for the intersex community of athletes. You can imagine, because sports is very gendered.
Yes.
So there's intersex, and then A actually stands for asexual. So yet another, like, all right, I think we endeavor to be inclusive, but sometimes it can be very overwhelming for allies to the community who are like, okay, so hold on, I thought I had it all down, LGBTQ, and now you're adding on all these letters. I think we have to be cognizant of not losing our audience. Like, I think the last I heard, Facebook has like 65 different gender identity
Holy cow.
descriptors or something. Like,
Wow.
yeah, so it's great. I love it. I think specificity when it comes to identity, each one of us is a flower with all kinds of unique attributes. And if I could wave my magic wand, I would somehow make this simple, that we could all be so unique in the way that we feel our sexual orientation and the way we express our gender. There's no two people that are alike.
I love that. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up to ask about the letters, it was pretty specific in that in other interviews with other guests who have disabilities, it has been a very common theme that they have vocalized that they would so much prefer if people would just ask what
Mm,
happened to them. How
mm,
did you, were you born with missing an arm? Did something happen? Rather than staring, which is obviously a very natural and a very human thing to do. If you are curious or don't understand something, and I'm sure this is very prevalent in your community as well. But that's why I wanted to ask, because I wanted to first educate myself, but also show the power in look what we just discovered. And now, there was thankfully, maybe it's because of who I've evolved into, but I didn't have a fear of asking you to explain that to me, because obviously I needed educating. I was curious, and now I'm educated.
mm.
So I think that has, that is also a very common, intersection of our worlds, that just ask. If
Yeah.
you don't understand, ask. And generally the answer dispels curiosity. You've grown now in your education, and it's something that has been an important theme in what I've spoken about with other guests. But before we go, two things. Number one, how do people get in touch with you? Because
Thank
there
you
could
for
be
asking.
a ton of questions post
Yes.
this
Oh, I
interview.
hope so. I hope so.
Yes.
Yes. I would love to count all of you as my audience. It would be wonderful. I'd be honored. I've written two books. First book is called Inclusion. Second book is called How to Be an Inclusive Leader.
Mm.
And my podcast is called The Will to Change. And we just released a paper on the future of inclusion in this, virtual world, and what we're learning from the community calls that we're having. Mindy, when you were co-host with me on one of them, And we're all those people who do what I do, basically architecting that future reality and trying to ensure it's inclusive. That community is who I stay very close to and who attends all of our calls and follows me on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, come and find me, Jennifer Brown Consulting. Twitter, I'm at Jennifer Brown. Instagram, I'm at Jennifer Brown Speaks. So I'm very active in social. We share a lot of really relevant articles, not just ours, but things that we read about that we think are important for people to know. But please, follow us, get on our mailing list, stay close to me because I'm always kind of the Rolling Stone. Like, I definitely am always thinking about the future. And a lot of people come to me and companies come to us and say, what's next? Like, what do we need to put in place now? And really, how can we be better in whatever comes next and whatever we're building? We don't want to rebuild the biased systems of old in the workplace as it was, because we know that didn't work for so many people. Is this our opportunity to do better? And I say, absolutely. Like, where do you want to start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Great. And I highly encourage everybody to follow her, talk to her. She's a really brilliant woman. I learn from her every time I get to speak with her. And lastly, which you slightly answered a little bit, by the way, I'd like to ask all of my guests one final question, and that's about the power of a vision board and manifesting what you want to happen in your lifetime. So if we got to peek into Jennifer Brown's vision board, what would we see?
Ooh. I think, I was loving keynoting before the pandemic hit, and now everything is on pause, and who knows if that's ever coming back. But it is to bring this message we talk about to audiences that really haven't heard it, and to reach them in a way that they can actually take the information in and hear it. And perhaps they're resistant, perhaps they're apathetic, perhaps they're just confused and afraid of saying the wrong thing, whatever it is. But I think it's to reach different audiences, perhaps, versus the choir, which I'm so happy to talk to you all the time. But I do feel we sometimes can get very siloed in the echo chamber of our identity. Yeah. And I believe very much in allyship. And I want to be, I want to be considered as somebody that is really, really using my privilege, whatever privileges I have, which is many, to use my voice fearlessly, to advocate, to bring awareness, to educate, and to speak that truth. So it would be to be on those stages with those audiences, using my voice in that way, writing more books, I hope, and bringing D&I to the masses in a way that's viewed someday as like, this is just a core part of leadership. This is not some kind of HR initiative. This isn't like nice to have. It's not, like moral argument. I mean, yes, moral argument, you should do the right thing. But even bigger than that, like, this is the future. And, we want to ride this wave, whoever we are, whoever I am, whichever company, products, whatever, like the future is us. And so I want to be a part of shaping that.
I love that. What a perfect way to end. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
So educational, inspiring, amazing. I adore you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mindy. I really appreciate it.
If you would like to be on the Gamut Network, please email us at talent@gamutmanagement.com to tell us why you'd be a great guest. Please also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Gamut Network, as well as follow us on our social platforms of Gamut Management. Thank you again, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Bye.